Taiyang sat alone in the dim observation room, watching the screens flicker with data that no one else cared to see. The station hummed around him, a massive wheel spinning in the darkness of space. Coalition Station Omega-7 was home to 40 different alien species, and humans were the least important of them all. He had been watching the Vorn Empire's ship movements for 3 months now. Every day, more warships gathered near the outer rim. Every day, the pattern became clearer. Every day, he sent his reports to the Council, and every day, those reports went ignored. Taiyang was a quiet man. He had always been. Even as a child on Earth, he preferred to watch and listen rather than speak. His commanders called it a weakness. The aliens called it typical human timidity. But Taiyang knew something they did not. Silence was not weakness. Silence was patience. Across the station, Hana walked through the marble corridors of the council chamber. She carried a datapad filled with Taiyang's latest report. Her hands shook slightly. She was young for a diplomatic aide, barely 25, but she had learned quickly that youth meant nothing to the aliens. Being human meant everything, and it meant nothing good. The council chamber doors opened with a hiss. Inside, representatives from a dozen species sat in floating chairs arranged in a circle. At the center stood General Kraxus of the Vorn Empire. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales that looked like armor. His yellow eyes tracked Hana as she entered. "The human wishes to speak," Kraxus said, his voice a low rumble that made the air vibrate. Several council members laughed. "Does she bring more warnings of imaginary threats?" Hana felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice steady. "Intelligence Officer Taiyang has compiled additional evidence of Vorn military buildup in Sector 7. The pattern suggests preparation for large-scale offensive action." A Mindari representative, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline form, pulsed with light. Its telepathic voice echoed in everyone's mind. "The Vorn are our allies. This paranoia is exhausting." "Paranoia is a human specialty," Kraxus added, spreading his clawed hands. "You are a species that sees danger in shadows. Perhaps it is because you are so fragile, so soft." More laughter. Hana stood there, holding the datapad with information that could save millions of lives, and they laughed. "The data is clear," she tried again. 17 Vorn battle fleets have repositioned near coalition worlds. Their supply lines have tripled. Their communication frequencies show encryption patterns consistent with military operations. "Enough," said the Kralex delegate, a 4-meter-long insect creature with too many legs. "We have heard these theories before. The Vorn explain their movements as routine exercises. We accept their word. Humanity has been part of this coalition for 30 years, yet you still do not understand how trust works." Hana looked around the circle. Not one face showed concern. Not one being would listen. She bowed slightly, the way humans were expected to, and left the chamber. In the observation room, Taiyang watched her exit through the security feeds. He had not expected a different result. He zoomed in on General Kraxus, who was now speaking privately with several other Vorn officers. Their body language was relaxed, confident. They had no idea anyone was watching, or perhaps they simply did not care. Humans were beneath notice. Taiyang began recording everything. 2 sectors away, Commander Yuna stood on the bridge of Soul's Pride. The frigate was small compared to alien warships, barely 200 meters long. Her crew of 32 humans maintained the ship with pride, even though their assigned duties were mundane. Today they were transporting medical waste from a Mindari colony to a processing station. "Patrol route complete, Commander," her first officer reported. "All waste containers secured for transport." Yuna nodded, looking at the stars beyond the viewport. She had been a naval officer for 15 years. She had trained for combat, for exploration, for first contact scenarios. Instead, she hauled garbage. This was what humanity had become in the Coalition: useful, harmless, forgettable. "Commander, we're receiving a priority message from Station Omega-7, the communications officer said. "It's odd. The encryption is human only, old military protocol." Yuna frowned. "Put it through." Taeyang's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired. He always looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Commander Yuna, this is Intelligence Officer Taeyang. I am sending you encrypted data on Vorn fleet movements. Do not transmit this to anyone else. Do not mention it over open channels. Just keep it somewhere safe. Please." The message ended. A moment later, files began downloading to the ship's computer. Thousands of files, data going back months. "Should I report this to command?" her first officer asked. Yuna thought about it, about Taeyang's tone, about the word please from a man who rarely spoke at all. "No," she said quietly. "Store it in the auxiliary core. Encrypt it with our private keys. Tell no one." Back on the station, Taeyang continued his work. He knew he was being foolish. He had been officially reprimanded twice for unnecessary alarmism. His superiors had told him to focus on his assigned tasks, monitoring asteroid mining operations and tracking waste disposal compliance. Important work for a forgettable species. But he could not stop watching, could not stop seeing what was right in front of everyone's eyes. The Vorn were preparing for war, not a small conflict, not a border dispute. This was total war, and the target was the Coalition itself. He pulled up a new screen showing human colony worlds, 47 of them, scattered across Coalition space, 12 billion humans living under the Coalition's protection. They trusted the alliance. They believed in the peace. Taeyang did not believe in the peace. He believed in patterns. He believed in data, and the data showed an extinction event approaching. Hana entered the observation room, her footsteps soft. Taeyang did not turn around, but he gestured to an empty chair. She sat down beside him, also staring at the screens. "They laughed again," she said. "They always do," Taeyang replied. "What do we do?" For a long moment, Taeyang said nothing. Then quietly, "We prepare, we watch, we wait, and when it happens, we remember every face that laughed, every voice that called us paranoid. Every being that thought humans were too soft to matter. Will that help?" Taeyang finally looked at her. His expression was calm, but something cold flickered in his eyes, something patient and dark. "Yes," he said simply. "It will help very much." Outside the station, the stars burned in eternal silence. And in that silence, an empire prepared to strike. They had forgotten a simple truth about humanity. The quiet ones were not weak. They were waiting. And when pushed far enough, when everything was taken from them, humans did not break. They evolved into something far more dangerous. The Vorn would learn this lesson soon. They would learn it in blood and fire and the cold vacuum of space. They would learn it from the silent human they had dismissed, who would become their nightmare. But that knowledge would come too late. 3 months passed like a slow countdown to doom. Taeyang had been relieved of his intelligence duties. His superiors said he needed rest and perspective. What they meant was that he had embarrassed them too many times. So he sat in his small quarters, watching the data streams he had illegally tapped into, and waited. He did not have to wait long. The attack came at 0400 station time. 17 Coalition worlds went silent simultaneously. No distress calls, no warnings. Just silence. Then, minutes later, the first reports began flooding in. Vorn warships had appeared in orbit around every major human colony. They had bypassed all Coalition defenses. They had used access codes that only allies would have. The betrayal was absolute. On Threshold 9, a mining colony of 2 million humans, Sergeant Minho was drinking coffee in the barracks when the alarms started screaming. He dropped his cup and ran for the armory, his mind not yet processing what was happening. The other Marines were already there, pulling on armor and grabbing weapons with the practiced speed of countless drills. "What's the situation?" Minho shouted over the chaos. "Vorn warships in orbit," his lieutenant yelled back. "Dropships inbound, thousands of them." "That's impossible. The Vorn are allies." "Not anymore." The first explosions hit the colony's shield generators. The ground shook. Minho had been a Marine for 8 years and had never fired a shot in anger. The coalition had been at peace his entire career. But looking at the faces around him, seeing the fear mixed with determination, he understood that peace was over. "Get the civilians to the evacuation centers," he ordered. "We hold the perimeter until the transports are loaded. Do not let them through." His squad nodded. They were terrified, but they were also human, and humans did not abandon their people. In orbit above the colony, Sora watched the battle from the control room of Mining Station Delta 5. She was an engineer, not a soldier. She fixed machines and calibrated sensors. But as she watched Vorn fighters destroy the colony's defense platforms one by one, she realized that her skills were about to become a weapon. The station's communication array was damaged, but not destroyed. If she could boost the signal, she could send a message to human space. Warn them. Give them time to prepare. Sora ran to the array chamber, her fingers flying over the controls. The system was designed to handle local transmissions. She needed it to reach across light years. It would probably explode. The power draw would kill the station's life support. But none of that mattered if everyone was already dead. She rerouted everything. Every spare watt of power. Every backup system. The array began to glow with heat. The metal was turning red. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, typing the same message again and again. "Vorn betrayal. All colonies under attack. Prepare for war." The array exploded. The shockwave threw Sora across the room. Fire suppressant systems activated, covering everything in white foam. But the message had sent. She had bought humanity a few hours of warning. Then the station's windows shattered as Vorn soldiers breached the hull. On Coalition Station Omega 7, chaos had consumed the once peaceful corridors. The Mindari representatives had collapsed into their crystalline shells, overwhelmed by the psychic shock of betrayal. The Kralliks were frantically evacuating their personnel. Everyone was running, screaming, trying to understand how this had happened. Taiyang walked calmly to the central data core. No one tried to stop him. No one even noticed him. He downloaded everything he had been collecting for months, plus all the new tactical data flooding in from the dying colonies. Battle plans, ship movements, Vorn command structures, everything. Hana found him there, her face streaked with tears. "They're killing everyone. Threshold 9 is falling. 7 other colonies are already lost. How did you know?" Taiyang did not answer directly. He handed her a data chip. "Get to the human embassy section, seal it. There is food and air for 3 months. Wait for me there." "Where are you going?" "To work." He paused, then added, "They wanted us to be silent and harmless. Now we will be silent and deadly. Hide, Hana. The war is starting." She took the chip and ran. Taiyang made his way to the station's armory. The guards were gone, fled to their own ships. He took what he needed: a suit of light armor, weapons, and most importantly, access to the Vorn military network. They had been so confident that they had not even bothered to change their security codes. Humans were not supposed to fight back. That was their first mistake. In space above Threshold 9, Commander Yuna brought Soul's Pride into the battle at full burn. Her small frigate was no match for Vorn battlecruisers, but she did not need to win. She needed to buy time. "Target their troop carriers," she ordered. "Weapons free." The frigate's railguns opened fire. Vorn dropships exploded like fireworks. It was not enough. For every one they destroyed, 5 more descended to the colony surface, but every second counted. Every transport they killed was a few hundred civilians who might escape. "Commander, we're receiving hundreds of distress signals," her communications officer reported, his voice breaking. 23 colonies under attack, human casualties estimated in the billions. Billions. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Yuna closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. Let herself feel the grief, the rage, the despair. Then she opened them again, and her voice was steel. "We can't save everyone, but we will save who we can. Keep firing!" On the surface of Threshold 9, Minho's squad had been fighting for 3 hours. They were down to 8 Marines from the original 20. The civilians were almost evacuated. Just a few more minutes. A Vorn warrior appeared at the end of the corridor, massive and armored, carrying a plasma rifle that could cut through steel. Minho raised his rifle and fired. The bullets bounced off the alien's shields. The Vorn laughed, a terrible grinding sound, and aimed its weapon. Minho thought of his family on Earth, hoped they were safe, hoped they would survive what was coming. Then he charged, screaming, firing until his magazine was empty. The Vorn's plasma bolt took him in the chest, but behind him the last transport lifted off. 5,000 civilians escaped into the darkness. They would remember Sergeant Minho. They would remember all the humans who died buying them time. Across Coalition space, the same story repeated. Billions died, but billions more were warned thanks to Sora's message. They armed themselves. They hid. They prepared. The Vorn expected quick surrender. They expected the soft humans to break, to beg, to submit. They had studied human history, seen the peaceful years in the Coalition, and concluded that humanity had grown weak. They were catastrophically wrong. In his hidden room on Station Omega-7, Taeyang worked through the night. He compiled lists, Vorn commanders, supply routes, weak points. He began sending encrypted messages to every human ship, every colony, every soldier. Not orders, just information, just targets. The Vorn wanted war. They had killed billions of humans in a single day. They had laughed at human warnings. They had called humanity soft and weak and beneath notice. Now they would learn the truth. Humans were not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most advanced. But they were the most stubborn, the most adaptable. And when pushed to the edge, they became something that terrified the galaxy. They became survivors who had nothing left to lose. The quiet human had watched and waited long enough. Now it was time to teach the Vorn the meaning of human silence. It was not peace. It was the silence before the storm. 6 months into the war, and the galaxy had learned to fear the darkness. The Vorn Empire controlled 31 human worlds. They had expected total victory by now. Instead, they were bleeding soldiers every single night. Their generals could not understand it. The humans had no fleet. No army large enough to matter. Their colonies should have been easy to hold. But every morning brought new horror. A command post destroyed. A supply convoy vanished. Officers found dead in their locked quarters, throats cut, no signs of forced entry. The humans were not fighting a war. They were fighting like ghosts, and at the center of it all was one man. Taeyang had become something new in those 6 months. He no longer worked from a station. He moved between occupied worlds in stolen ships, never staying anywhere long enough to be caught. He had stopped speaking entirely. Communication came through encrypted text messages, brief and precise. The resistance cells started calling him the Reaper because death followed wherever he went. Tonight he was on Threshold 9, the colony that had fallen in the first wave of attacks. The Vorn had turned it into a major military base. 2,000 alien soldiers occupied the ruins of human cities. They felt safe behind their shields and patrols. They were wrong. Taeyang moved through the ventilation tunnels, wearing a cooling suit that masked his heat signature. The Vorn relied heavily on thermal imaging. They could see in the dark better than humans, but their sensors were predictable. Yunji, a xenobiologist working with the Resistance, had discovered this weakness. She had sent the information to every human fighter. Now the Vorn's greatest advantage had become a liability. He reached the command center's ventilation grate and looked down. 5 Vorn officers were planning tomorrow's raid on a human refugee camp. Tai Yang listened, memorized every detail, and uploaded the information to the Resistance network. Then he dropped 3 small devices into the room and disappeared back into the tunnels. The devices were Yunji's design. They emitted a frequency that disrupted Vorn neural patterns, causing extreme pain and disorientation. Not lethal, but effective. Tai Yang did not always kill. Sometimes information was more valuable than death. 20 minutes later, when human resistance fighters stormed the command center, the Vorn officers were unconscious on the floor. The raiders took everything they could carry: weapons, data, and most importantly, the codes for tomorrow's raid. The refugee camp would be empty when the Vorn arrived. Another failure to report to their superiors. Across the colony, other attacks unfolded simultaneously. Supply depots burned. Communication towers fell silent. Patrol vehicles exploded on empty streets. By dawn, the Vorn commander had lost a quarter of his garrison and had no idea how. This was the pattern. Every occupied world, every single night, the humans called it the Ghost War. Jiwan piloted her ship through an asteroid field, hauling supplies to resistance fighters on 5 different worlds. She had been a merchant captain before the war, trading in luxury goods and exotic foods. Now she smuggled weapons, medicine, and information. The route she traveled was impossible according to every navigation chart, but Jiwan had found paths through uncharted space that no alien knew existed. She called it the Shadow Run, a network of hidden routes that connected every human colony and resistance cell. The Vorn could control the main trade lanes all they wanted. Humans moved through the darkness between stars. Her hold was full of cooling suits, thermal dampers, and Yunji's latest weapon designs. She also carried messages from Tai Yang, distributing his intelligence to fighters across dozens of worlds. She had never met the Reaper, but she had seen his work. Every resistance cell told stories. Some said he was a ghost. Others said he was a demon wearing human skin. Jiwan thought he was probably just a man doing what needed to be done. A very dangerous man. Approaching Threshold 9 drop point, her co-pilot announced. Vorn patrols are heavy tonight. They're always heavy after the Reaper visits, Jiwan said with a grim smile. She cut the engines and let the ship drift on momentum, just another piece of space debris. The Vorn patrols passed within a kilometer and saw nothing. On the surface, resistance fighters were waiting. They loaded the supplies in silence and vanished back into the ruins. This was how humanity survived. By being patient, by being invisible, by refusing to die. Deep in the occupied territories of Threshold 9, in tunnels beneath the ruined cities, hundreds of humans lived in hiding. Among them was Yunji, working in a makeshift laboratory lit by stolen power cells. She studied Vorn biology obsessively, looking for any weakness she could exploit. She had learned so much in 6 months. The Vorn had thick scales and powerful muscles, but their eyesight was poor in full darkness. They had excellent hearing, but could be disoriented by specific sound frequencies. Their armor was strong against energy weapons, but vulnerable to certain types of explosives. Every discovery went into reports sent to Taeyang, who distributed them to every resistance cell. Humans were learning to fight smarter. They avoided direct confrontation. They struck at night. They used the Vorn's own strengths against them. Yunji's latest discovery was the most important yet. The Vorn military operated on a strictly hierarchical command structure. Every unit reported to a central coordination network. If that network could be disrupted, Their entire military would fall into chaos. She encrypted the findings and sent them to Taeyang. Within hours, his response came back. Just 2 words: keep working. The Vorn were learning to fear the night, but they were also learning to hate. General Craxus, the same commander who had mocked humans in the Coalition Council, had become obsessed with capturing the Reaper. He offered rewards that could buy entire planets. He tortured prisoners for information. He executed his own soldiers for failing to catch one human. But Taeyang remained a ghost. He existed in reports and rumors. Some Vorn soldiers started to believe he was not real, just a myth the humans told to keep their spirits up. Those soldiers died first because they let their guard down. Other Vorn knew better. They had seen the bodies. They had found their commanders dead in locked rooms. They had watched supply bases burn without any sign of who set the fires. They knew the Reaper was real, and that knowledge terrified them. In a captured Vorn database, Taeyang found the Empire's true plan. It was worse than he had imagined. After extracting resources from human worlds, the Vorn intended complete extermination. Not slavery, not occupation, genocide. They considered humanity too dangerous to leave alive. Taeyang sat in darkness, reading the document on his stolen datapad. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something beyond the cold focus of war. He felt rage, pure and absolute rage. The Vorn wanted to exterminate humanity, every man, woman, and child. They wanted to erase humans from existence because they had committed the crime of being underestimated, of proving themselves dangerous when they were supposed to be harmless. Taeyang sent the document to every resistance leader. Let them see, let them know, let them understand that surrender was not an option. This was a war of survival, and only one species would remain when it was over. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his datapad. He barely recognized himself. His face was thin, his eyes cold, his expression empty. The man who had quietly watched alien council meetings felt like a stranger from another life. That man had believed in peace and cooperation. The Reaper knew better. The Reaper knew that sometimes, to protect what you love, you have to become what your enemies fear most. The Ghost War would continue, every night, every occupied world, until the Vorn learned that humanity's silence was not submission. It was the sound of predators hunting in the dark. 1 year into the war, humanity stood on the edge of extinction. 31 worlds remained under Vorn occupation. The resistance had slowed the enemy advance, but they could not stop it. Every day brought more death. Every night brought more ghost attacks that bought time but not victory. Taeyang had spent that year learning everything about the Vorn military. Every attack had been a lesson. Every stolen document had been a piece of a larger puzzle. Now, finally, he understood how they worked. More importantly, he understood how to break them. He sat in a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Threshold 9, surrounded by holographic displays showing Vorn fleet positions across 31 star systems. Beside him were the surviving resistance leaders, Yunji with her xenobiology reports, Jiwon with her smuggling routes, and a new face, Doyun, a young hacker who had done the impossible. "Show them," Taeyang said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse. He had not spoken aloud in months. Doyun pulled up a 3-dimensional map of the Vorn military network. Every Vorn fleet operates on centralized coordination. Every ship, every soldier, every commander reports to a single command node. I found it here. Station Infernus, their forward operating base in the Threshold system. "If we destroy that station, what happens?" asked one of the resistance leaders. Yunji answered. "Chaos. Their fleet coordination collapses. Ships can't communicate effectively. Ground forces lose orbital support. Their entire command structure falls apart." "For how long?" "Maybe a few hours. maybe a day. They have backup systems. But in that window, they would be vulnerable. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what Taiyang was suggesting. One strike, one moment of vulnerability. It was humanity's only chance. But Station Infernus was defended by 3 Vorn battlecruisers and had shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. Getting inside would be impossible. Getting out would be suicidal. "We need a distraction," Taiyang said. "Something big enough to pull their attention away from the station." Across human space, Hana had been working on her own mission. She had spent a year rebuilding relationships with former coalition members. Most species wanted nothing to do with the war. But the Mindari, the telepathic beings who had collapsed in shock when the Vorn betrayed them, had slowly been recovering. A splinter group, ashamed of their earlier dismissal of human warnings, offered to help. Their assistance was limited. They could not fight, but they could provide intelligence. Real-time locations of Vorn fleets, communication intercepts, strategic analysis. It was not much, but combined with human determination, it was enough. Hana sent the Mindari intelligence to Taiyang. His response was immediate. "Tell them thank you. Tell them to prepare for tomorrow. Everything happens tomorrow." Admiral Yuna stood on the bridge of Soul's Pride, looking at the fleet assembled around her. It was not much of a fleet, 20 human ships, mostly frigates and destroyers. Against the Vorn armada, they were insects challenging a giant, but they were all that remained of Earth's navy. "You all understand the mission," Yuna said, her voice carried to every ship in the fleet. "We jump to Threshold 9. We engage the Vorn battle group. We hold their attention for as long as possible. Most of us will not survive this day, but humanity will remember. The galaxy will remember. We are proof that humans do not break. We bend reality until it breaks instead." The crews responded with silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of determination. They had said their goodbyes. They had written their final messages. They were ready. "All ships," Yuna commanded. "Jump!" Space tore open, and 20 human warships emerged directly in front of the Vorn fleet defending Station Infernus. Alarms screamed. The Vorn scrambled to respond. Every gun, every missile, every fighter turned toward the human fleet. Perfect. While the battle erupted in space, a single small shuttle drifted toward Station Infernus on the opposite side. It was a Vorn shuttle, stolen months ago and carefully repainted. Inside were 13 humans in captured Vorn armor, and at their head was Taiyang. They docked without challenge. The station's attention was focused on the space battle. Taiyang led his team through corridors filled with running soldiers, all heading to battle stations. No one looked twice at another squad moving through the chaos. They reached the central command node without firing a shot. Doyen went to work on the systems while the others set up a defensive perimeter. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder as the station's defenders realized something was wrong. "How long?" Taiyang asked. 3 minutes to download all command protocols, 5 minutes to upload the virus, 2 minutes to set the explosives. You have 4 minutes total. Then we leave." Doyun's fingers flew across the console. Download, upload. Every second counted. Every second was paid for in human blood in space above. On Soul's Pride, half the fleet was already destroyed. Yuna watched her ships die one by one, each buying precious minutes with their sacrifice. Her own ship shook as Vorn fire hammered the shields. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5, her tactical officer reported. "Shields at 20%. Keep firing. As long as we have power, we fight." A Vorn battlecruiser filled the viewport, close enough to see the scoring on its hull. Yuna smiled grimly. "All power to forward railguns. Target their bridge." Soul's Pride fired its final salvo. The battlecruiser's bridge exploded in a fountain of atmosphere and debris. The massive ship began to drift, its command crew dead. Then a plasma torpedo hit Soul's Pride amidships. The frigate broke in two. Yuna had just enough time to think that she had bought enough time. Then there was only fire and void. Inside Station Infernus, alarms began screaming as Taeyang's team ran for the shuttle. Behind them, explosives detonated in sequence. The command node collapsed into itself. The virus Doyen had uploaded began spreading through every system, corrupting data and severing connections. They reached the shuttle bay to find it full of Vorn soldiers. There was no way through. No way out. Taeyang did not hesitate. He drew his weapons and attacked. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. Taeyang moved through the Vorn like death itself, silent and unstoppable. His team fought beside him, desperate and fierce. They had known this was a one-way trip. They had accepted it. But acceptance did not mean surrender. Taeyang found himself face-to-face with General Kraxus, the massive Vorn commander who had laughed at human warnings a year ago, who had called humanity soft, who had orchestrated the deaths of billions. Kraxus raised his plasma rifle. Taeyang was faster. He closed the distance, his blade finding the gaps in Vorn armor that Yunji had mapped months ago. Kraxus fell, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. The soft human had killed him in seconds. The team reached their shuttle. 4 of the original 13 were still alive. They launched under heavy fire, the hull taking damage that should have been fatal. But somehow, the shuttle held together long enough to jump to hyperspace. Behind them, Station Infernus went dark, and across 31 star systems, the Vorn fleet fell into chaos. Their command was broken. Their coordination was gone. Their invincible empire had been crippled by one silent human and a handful of determined fighters. The Reaper had struck, and the galaxy would never be the same. 2 weeks after Operation Silent Reaper, the galaxy held its breath. The Vorn Empire was in full retreat. Without central coordination, their fleets had fallen into confusion. Human resistance fighters had risen up on every occupied world simultaneously. The ghost attacks that had terrorized the Vorn for a year became open warfare. Colony after colony was liberated, not by superior firepower, but by humans who refused to accept defeat. The cost had been unimaginable. 8.7 billion humans dead. 31 worlds devastated, cities reduced to rubble, families destroyed, an entire generation marked by war. But humanity had survived. Taeyang sat in a hospital bed on a reclaimed human station. His body was healing from the wounds taken during the escape from Station Infernus. His mind was not healing at all. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, unable to stop seeing the faces of everyone who had died following his orders. A doctor came by each day asking him questions. Taeyang did not respond. The words were stuck somewhere deep inside, buried under a year of violence and death. He had become the Reaper so completely that he did not know how to be Taeyang anymore. Nari was assigned as his psychologist. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that had also seen too much. She sat beside his bed and did not ask him to talk. Instead, she talked to him. About small things. The weather on the station, the taste of real coffee now that supply lines were reopening, the children laughing in the residential sections. Slowly, over days, Taeyang began to listen, to remember that the world was more than war. Across the station, delegations from the coalition were gathering. They had come to beg humanity's forgiveness, to offer reparations, to try to rebuild the alliance they had broken with their arrogance. The Mindari sent representatives full of shame. The Kralex offered tribute. Dozens of species that had ignored human warnings now fell over themselves to apologize. Hana attended the meetings. She was no longer a dismissed aide. She spoke with the authority of someone who had been proven right at terrible cost. When the coalition offered humanity a seat on the High Council, she did not celebrate. She simply asked, "Why should we trust you?" No one had an answer for that. "You called us paranoid," Hana continued, her voice soft but cutting. You laughed when we warned you. You trusted the Vorn because they were strong, and you dismissed us because we were weak. 8 billion humans died because you could not imagine that we might be right. Now you offer us a council seat. You offer us command positions. You offer us everything we should have had from the beginning. She paused, looking at each alien representative. We will consider your offers, but understand this. Humanity will never again rely on the protection of others. We will never again assume that peace is guaranteed. You taught us that lesson in blood. We will not forget it. The coalition representatives had no response. They had come expecting gratitude. Instead, they found a species that had been transformed by fire into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. The Vorn Empire's formal surrender came on the 15th day. They agreed to every human demand, full withdrawal from all occupied territories, reparations that would take generations to pay, war crime trials for their commanders. The proud empire that had thought humans were soft now begged for mercy. Humanity's response was delivered by a recorded message from Admiral Yuna, except Yuna was dead, killed in the battle at Station Infernus. Her last orders had been recorded before the mission, to be played only if she did not survive. To the Vorn Empire, her image said, you underestimated us. You thought silence meant weakness. You thought patience meant cowardice. You were wrong. Humanity accepts your surrender, but we will not forget what you did. Every world you burned, every life you took, every human who died defending their homes, we will remember. And if you ever threaten humanity again, we will remind you why the galaxy learned to fear the Reaper. The message ended. The Vorn representatives left in silence, their scaled faces pale with fear. They had wanted to conquer the soft humans. Instead, they had created a nightmare that would haunt their species for generations. In the hospital, Taeyang received visitors. Yunji came, bringing reports on post-war reconstruction. Jiwan stopped by between supply runs, bringing him real food from Earth. Doyen visited once, said nothing, just sat beside the bed for an hour in understanding silence. They had all changed. They had all lost pieces of themselves in the war, but they had survived. On the 21st day, Hana found Taeyang in the station's observation deck. He was standing at the window, looking at the stars. She stood beside him, also silent, also watching. The coalition wants to meet you, she said finally. They want to thank the Reaper, give you medals, make speeches about your courage. Taeyang's jaw tightened. No. It was the first word he had spoken in 2 weeks. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I told them you would say that, Hana replied, but they asked me to tell you something. The Mindari splinter group that helped us, they have a saying. The sword that defends becomes part of the shield. You became a weapon to protect humanity. That does not make you a monster. It makes you a guardian. I killed thousands, Taeyang said. You saved billions. Does that balance? Hana thought about it. I don't know. But I know that without you, humanity would be extinct. The Vorn's plan was complete genocide. Every man, woman, and child. You stopped that. The price was terrible, but the alternative was annihilation. Taeyang closed his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the weight of all he had done, he found a small measure of peace. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Just acceptance that he had done what needed to be done, and now he had to find a way to live with it. A week later, a memorial was unveiled on the reclaimed world of Threshold 9. It was a simple black wall with 8,700,000,000 names. Every human who had died in the war. Taeyang stood before it, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in over a year. Around him were thousands of survivors, silent in remembrance. He found Sergeant Minho's name, Sora's name, Admiral Yuna's name, the names of his team members who had died at Station Infernus. Each name was a person. Each person had a story. Each story had ended so that others could continue. Nari stood beside him. She had asked if he wanted to speak at the ceremony. He had refused. But now, looking at the wall of names, he felt words rising up from the deep place where he had buried them. "We survived," he said quietly, just to Nari, just loud enough to be heard. "Now we must remember why." She nodded, understanding. Humanity had survived not by being stronger or smarter or more advanced than their enemies. They had survived through determination, sacrifice, and the willingness to become whatever was necessary to protect their own. But that survival came with responsibility. To remember the cost, to honor the dead, to build something worthy of their sacrifice. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Silence can hide both patience and fury. Peace can coexist with the capacity for terrible violence, and humanity, dismissed as soft and harmless, had proven themselves to be the most dangerous species in known space. Not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to die. Taeyang looked up at the sky, where human ships now patrolled, where colonies were being rebuilt, where children would grow up in a galaxy that finally understood what humanity was capable of. The Reaper was gone, faded back into the shadows. In his place stood a man who had seen the abyss and returned, scarred, changed, but alive, and determined to make sure that humanity never again had to unleash the darkness they carried within.